On October 28, 2004, Dave Shaw embarked on a record-breaking dive into the depths of Bushman's Hole, which is more famously known as Bozeman's Hut. He prepared his diving gear, performed last checks on his rebreather set, and descended, pushing humanly known limits to the extreme. Only 10 minutes into his descent, Dave had already hit a staggering depth of 800 feet, where he proceeded to look for the bottom of that uncharted area. According to his crew members, Dave's performance into the cave wasn't just any luck, where, reportedly, he had been training for years and years to endure the pressure at such depths. Plus, he knew that he wasn't the first one to touch the bottom, but wanted to set a new record of first-ever human being to explore the cave's depth. A few more minutes in, and Dave had finally touched the bottom, reaching the depth of 886 feet below the surface. And although his crew on the surface were worried about his safety, he seemed calm and knew what he was doing. After swimming for what seemed like 50 feet to the left, he stumbled upon something which would change his life forever. Dave John Shaw was born on 20th July 1954 in Cochran, Australia, where he developed a deep love for adventure and outdoor sports from an early age. And this passion further led him to become a pilot in 1973, where he started flying crop dusters, known for one of the most dangerous professions, which is prone to countless accidents and tragedies. It seemed perfect for someone like Dave who loved thrill. And just a couple of years into his job, he married a Melbourne woman, Anne Broughton, had kids, and eventually graduated from crop dusters to commercial planes. Over the decade, Dave traveled multiple locations around the world and finally found his dream job, where he started working at Cathay Pacific Airlines in the year 1989. His first exposure to diving came in 1997, thanks to his 17-year-old son, Stephen, with whom he went on his first diving trip. And from that moment on, he had been hooked to the beauty of underwater cave explorations and diving. In 2002, this hobby, or one would say newfound passion, led him to Don Shirley, a talented diver who had the same love for cave diving. Together, they went on multiple diving expeditions at Komati Springs and developed a deep friendship over their shared love for adventure and underwater thrill. Shirley later said in an interview that Dave was an exceptional diver from the start, which many believe because of his pilot background. Flying planes for so many years, he was accustomed to pressure changes at different altitudes. In 2004, Shirley introduced him to Bushman's Hole, which was considered to be one of the deepest freshwater caves in the world. Known for its treacherous terrain, where divers' physical abilities get tested each passing seconds, this cave was not for the weak of hearts. Tragically, over the years, many divers had tried to explore the cave, but very few had lived to tell the story. In fact, one of the most haunting stories tied to the cave was that of a 20-year-old young diver named Deon Dreyer. In 1994, during the practice dive at the cave, he reportedly went missing, where many believed that he might have drowned and must be somewhere at the bottom. In 1999, a South African diver, Nuno Gomes, set the record of first person to reach the bottom of the cave. That said, he had simply touched the bottom and returned to the surface. Since then, nobody had dared to explore the cave's depth further. And for Dave, who loved thrill, this was the perfect opportunity to test his diving capabilities to the fullest. And just a few months later, on October 28, 2004, Dave made history when he became the second human being to ever touch the bottom of the cave. That said, his actual goal was to explore the cave's depth and set a new record in cave exploration. After swimming for 50 feet to the left, he stumbled upon a human body, which he immediately recognized as Deon Dreyer. When Dave returned to the surface after the historic dive, instead of celebrating his achievement, he announced that he wanted to recover Brian's body from the bottom. Many believed David felt a deep or somewhat personal connection to Deon's story and his passion for diving. Plus, there was no one except Dave who had the skills and courage to even pull this operation. In the months that followed, he contacted Brian's parents and made a promise to bring his body back to them. He immediately started working towards that goal, where he was in constant touch with Shirley and other crew, carefully structuring their strategy for the operation, which they named as the Big Dive. In early 2005, David returned to South Africa and started preparing, where he did multiple practice dives and double-checked their equipment to avoid any risks. Little did he know the tragedy that awaited him just days after. On January 8, 2005, at approximately 6:15 a.m., Dave Shaw began his descent with a single goal: to recover Deon's body from the treacherous waters of Bushman's cave. And after what seemed like 10 minutes into his descent, he had already reached a remarkable depth of 820 feet below the water level. While many believe this to be an impossible task, considering the pressure one would feel at such depth, Dave was determined to prove them wrong. In fact, the pressure he was experiencing was 25 times more than what we feel on the land. To put it into perspective, such tremendous pressure is enough to completely crush human bones under normal circumstances. Fortunately, Dave knew the risks and had prepared rebreathers at a special gas mixture in advance to survive the journey. Plus, he'd been training for weeks and arguably months for this fateful day. That said, as he continued his descent, where Deon's body finally seemed within his reach, something went terribly wrong. On the surface, just a few minutes before the dive, Dave had instructed his diving partner, Don Shirley, to start his descent 15 minutes after his initial dive, where he had planned to meet him while on his way back at the depth of 720 feet and hand him Deon's body in a bag. At 6:28 a.m., Shirley started his dive, and as minutes passed, Shirley had an underlying feeling of unease, as if something had gone wrong. 10 minutes into his dive, he surpassed his previous record and reached the rendezvous point at the depth of 725 feet. But as he looked below into the darkness to find the signs of Dave's equipment, he reportedly saw two unusual things. The first thing was the absence of air bubbles. As in most cases, the rebreather usually gives off some excess air during the descent. Plus, the visible light at the bottom, which was possibly from Dave, was not moving from its place. After going another 30 feet into the depth, Shirley came to a haunting realization that Dave had indeed lost his life during the rescue operation. And as if the things hadn't been bad already, Shirley's rebreather unexpectedly collapsed because of the high pressure, which meant that he had to manually control the oxygen flow. With no option left, Shirley started his ascent to the surface, which would prove to be more than he could handle. And after going for what seemed like 5 minutes, where he had been manually injecting oxygen on the go, he met his crew divers at the depth of 387 feet. He handed them the plate which stated a heartbreaking sentence: "Dave, not coming back," and asked them to quickly deliver it to the surface. Minutes into the efforts to reach the surface, Shirley started feeling dizzy and reportedly vomited multiple times. According to the experts, this could have happened because of inner ear decomposition sickness, which is caused by the rapid change in the pressure. Plus, this condition could pose more problems if not treated immediately. When he finally resurfaced after hours and hours of battle against extreme pressure and hypothermia, the rescue team quickly placed him in the recompression chamber. And although he had barely made it back alive because of his luck, the same could not be said for Dave. As word of his passing spread on the surface, everyone mourned the loss of one of the greatest cave divers. Many couldn't stop themselves but to remember his last statement, where he had said to not retrieve his body if something happens to him in the cave. Respecting his wish, his fellow crewmates and loved ones decided to leave his body at the bottom of Bushman's hole for eternity. That said, fate had some other plans. As on January 12, 2005, while recovering the equipment and tanks from the depths of 328 feet with an inflated bag, one of the diving crew noticed an unusual white braided line hanging from above. And at the end of that line, they discovered Dave and Deon's body floating at the depth of 98 feet. Many experts believe the bodies, which were thought to be tangled down at the bottom, might have floated back slowly because of the shot line they recovered earlier. As hours passed, the operation to secure their bodies began, where the divers made the descent with the hope that their body would be still at the same level. They had little time in their hands because once the gases inside Dave's body began to settle, it could start sinking back into the depths again. The divers quickly pulled their bodies to the surface and got their hands on the documentary camera, which allowed everyone to understand what exactly happened down there. After carefully reviewing the footage of that tragic dive, it had become obvious that many things had gone wrong, which led to that tragic outcome. It was clearly seen in the footage that Dave had made it to the bottom at 886 feet after approximately 12 minutes. That said, there was an unexpected error they had never accounted for. Deon's body, which experts believed had decomposed into bones, was instead turned into a mummified state with a soap-like substance called adipocere. And because of this weird condition, the body had become slippery, Plus, when Dave removed the stuck body, it started floating, which further increased difficulties for Dave and made him panic. In fact, at that point, Dave's breathing rate increased to a level where he had been breathing 34 times a minute, which later Shirley tried to mimic and immediately passed out. In that situation, Dave had been working with both of his hands trying to put Deon's body into the bag. But because of his heavy breathing, plus the added difficulty of floating body, further led to a condition called narcosis. And after what seemed like 6 minutes struggling to complete the job, he decided to give up and abandon the dive. However, when he tried to ascend, he got tangled in the white line, which he had used to mark body location while on his previous dive. During those heart-wrenching minutes, everyone watched as Dave struggled to free himself while his gasping slowly faded away. And just like that, a few minutes later, he fell unconscious and drowned at the age of 51. The initial autopsy report revealed the cause of death to be carbon dioxide poisoning. Plus, the further reports suggested that narcosis, particularly nitrogen narcosis, might have significantly interfered with his ability of problem solving, which explained the struggle he'd been having while untangling himself. Experts believe Dave could have made it back alive if he'd abandoned the mission a few minutes earlier. Upon examining his equipment, experts found no issue with rebreathers or any other things. Dave died exploring and trying to achieve something he wanted to do. And to me, it's better than dying in a car crash, Shirley said later in the interview. A few days after the rescue, their bodies were sent to their families, where Dave's wife decided to spread his remains back to Bushman's hole, keeping his last wish intact. Dave Shaw was arguably the finest cave divers the world had seen. He chose to go back in the depth just to bring peace to a family who waited over a decade for a closure. Years later, his son, Stephen, reflected on his father's untimely death. He died doing what he loved, and more importantly, he died trying to do something good for someone else, he said in his interview. He was a man who dove deeper than most ever dared, and doing so, he became a symbol of what it means to truly go beyond.